Welcome back to Questing Beast. I'm Ben. Today we'll be taking a look at Best Left Buried, the Crypt Digger's Guide to Survival. Before we begin, though, a quick shout out to Aidan Turner and Dave Hoskins, who both became $4 patrons over on the Questing Beast Patreon. Thank you so much, guys, for supporting the channel. I really appreciate everything that you do. So this is a softcover book. It's available in physical form from Exalted Funeral or in PDF form from DriveThruRPG. I'll put links down in the description below as usual. And I should point out right at the beginning that if you are watching this within the next 40 hours or so from me publishing this, there is a Kickstarter going on that's going to add a whole bunch of one-page dungeons or short pamphlet style dungeons for this game and for other OSR stuff. It's called A Doom to Speak, and I'll put a link down below in the description for that as well if you want to check out some supplementary material. All right, so let's get into the meat of this. This is not a module, but a rule set. And I should point out, in the interest of full disclosure, does have contributions from me down there at the bottom. So as far as I can tell, there's a lot of Maze Rats elements to this. It's a heavily hacked version of Maze Rats with plenty of other influences thrown in as well. It does have a much darker tone than Maze Rats, and it definitely goes for a grim, dark, rather horrific, nightmarish version of dungeon crawling. There's some LOTFP-ish elements to the way it approaches investigating crypts. So we start off with making a character. In fact, let me skip all the way to the end to start off with, because oftentimes the character sheet tells you a lot about the game. So you have 3 basic stats: Brawn, Wits, and Will, similar to what you would see in Maze Rats, but Dex has been replaced by Wits. You have an XP, you have advancements, so you do get special abilities as you level up. So you get more complicated abilities. You can customize your character probably to a greater degree than a lot of the very light games that we've been seeing from the OSR. You have equipment, you have consequences. This could be wounds and other long-term effects from crypt digging. Treasure, weapons, and then you have vigor, which is basically your hit points, and grip, which is essentially your sanity. And it's also used to power things like magic. So we start off by getting into making a character right off the bat. I understand why this was placed here, but I would have liked to see maybe a brief overview of the rules first, mostly because the rules only come up much further along. And so you go through about half the book without having a very clear idea of what most of the different terms mean and how they're used. So it would be nice to have that at the beginning, but it's not terribly complicated. So you have your basic 3 stats: Brawn, Wit, and Will, and Vigor and Grip, which is your health and your sanity. And you have Ark Types. This comes with, I believe, 10 Ark Types. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah. And those include customizable ones like the Everyman. If you don't have one here that really fits what you want, you are able to create your own fairly easily. We go into the different types of Ark Types. We have the Believer, the Kabbalist, the Cutthroat, the Dastard, the Everyman, the Freeblade, the Outcast, the Protagonist, the Scholar, and the Veteran. All of these come with a number of special abilities that set them apart and make them mechanically distinct. We have equipment, where you have hand weapons, light weapons, heavy weapons, and long weapons, throwing weapons, and ranged weapons, along with a number of basic items that you can take for crypt digging, or dungeon crawling, whatever you want to call it. And you have your armor, basic rundown of how your weapons work and the different types that are available, shields and armor, advancements, and getting right into the game. So as you start the game, as you go on through the game, you're going to be gaining advancements pretty regularly. And there's a wide variety of these to choose from, which allow you to create a pretty customized character. So anywhere from new spells, because there isn't a detailed spell list in the way that you would see in a lot of OSR games. Instead, you can actually take an advancement, which basically gives you a magical ability that you can spend grip in order to use. And there's not a ton of them, but a lot of them are quite versatile. So we have anything from a concoctionist, if you want to be good at making potions, to things like simply upgrading your grip and your will and your wit. We have special abilities like the Holy Song of War, So you can spend a point of grip to grant a number of allies up to their will the Song of War. Each ally can use the Song of War once before the end of combat to apply the upper hand to an attack roll or stat check. The upper hand is essentially this game's version of advantage. You can see that there's quite a few here, allowing for a lot of different types of characters. Getting into playing the game, you have your basic stat check, which is done by rolling 2d6, adding your relevant ability, and trying to hit 9. So very similar to Maze Rats. Maze Rats does 10. This does 9 as the standard check. You have the upper hand, which works like advantage. You roll 3d6 and just take the best 2, or against the odds, where you roll 3d6 and take the worst 2. A nice little system that he has here is multiple instances that codifies more specifically how it works when you have multiple advantages and disadvantages. I'm just going to call them that. And they cancel each other out one for one, but you can have multiple versions of them or multiple copies. And if you ever have 3 advantages total after canceling out disadvantages, then the task you're trying to do is just counted as being trivial. So it's just going to work. Similarly, if you have 3 disadvantages after canceling out any advantages, then it becomes impossible. So there is a balancing act here where you're trying to get as many advantages as possible in order to hopefully make the tasks become just trivial and obviously successful. This is similar to what I wrote in Maze Rats, but it is more codified and I like it quite a bit. We have your combat system where you're rolling against a target number that's raised, that's improved by the armor that they are wearing. It works on zones when you're moving from zone to zone during combat rather than having a specific number of feet that you can move. When you attack, you roll 3d6 and then you choose whichever 2 dice you want of those 3d6, and you get those dice higher than the target number, which, as I said, can vary depending on the enemy's armor. And then the third die that you did not use is the one that deals the damage. So in effect, if you rolled a bunch of really high dice, you could pick 2 of the lower dice that beat their armor and then use the remaining high dice for damage. So there's a couple options that you have there. And then you can get advantage and disadvantage where you roll 4d6 and just take the best 3 or the worst 3. We have rules for fighting a whole bunch of different types of monsters or a large crowd of monsters all at once, which is a useful rule to have. And some rules for dying. I like that there is an unconsciousness that is possible rather than instant death. I've been thinking about this recently, and I really do like it when games have this mitigating effect, where instead of dying immediately, you just get knocked out. And because it adds tactical interest to combats. When your friends are being knocked out around you, not only do you have to think about whether you can run, but you also have to think about whether you can try and save them and drag them to safety. And I think that adds some nice flavor to it. You can rest. Resting heals very little health. And your grip, your sanity, hardly ever comes back. It comes back extremely slowly. You maybe get 1 point of grip back if you rest in a totally secure location, in a fancy bed in an inn somewhere. So you really have to watch your sanity. As it starts dropping, you're going to have a really hard time getting it back. As you level up, you're going to gain advancements, as I noted before. It has some status conditions here, some basic rules for grappling, and some miscellaneous rules. Now, interestingly, there's a whole chapter on consequences. So when you are fighting, you can take injuries. Right? Taking injury voluntarily resets your grip to 5. So this is one way you can get your grip back, by taking injuries. So players are incentivized to really add more flavor and more injuries and more depth to their character as they get mangled by the horrible things that they find beneath the earth. You can also receive Insanities, which can reset your grip to 10. So Insanities are even better. And there's a wide variety of them here. Let's see, there are 18 standard Insanities, though of course you can come up with more with your Game Master. They're all well fleshed out. Some of them get worse over time. Some of them are simply character flaws, so you have a bunch of different options. And you have monsters. And the rules for monsters are, don't tell your players what the monsters are, just describe how horrible they are. along with some great guidelines here for creating your own monsters in a way that makes sense and will terrify your players and actually make them think about what they're doing. How are they fighting? Do they want to fight this thing? All of those great things. And monster adaptation. So a whole bunch of monster special abilities that you can tack on in order to give them more mechanical depth. Overall, it looks like a really great system. There are plans to create a deluxe version, which should be coming along at some point in the future, which I think will add a lot more depth to this. But this is perfectly sufficient to running most OSR games. If you liked my game Maze Rats, you will probably like Best Left Buried, especially if you wanted to take it in a grittier, grimmer direction than Maze Rats does. Maze Rats is a bit more friendly, I feel like, mostly because the goofiness of the spell system has a more lighthearted feel, in my opinion. But this definitely takes it in a darker, almost Veins of the Earth-like direction. So I think it fills that niche really well, and I'm really curious to see what the author does in the future. So this is created by Zachary Cox with art by Ben Brown. The only real criticism I would have of the layout is that because it does have fully justified columns, you do have a lot of situations where you'll have these giant gaps between words, and it happens pretty frequently, which I found a little annoying to read. So maybe ragged edges would help a little bit. I know that's a tiny quibble, but it was kind of bothering me a little bit as I was reading it. So I will put links to Best Left Buried down in the description below. As I said, PDF is going to be on DriveThruRPG. You can get the physical copy on Exalted Funeral, and make sure to check out the Kickstarter as well if you want to get a whole bunch of one-page dungeons to run in this or in your OSR game of choice. All right, that's it for today, everyone. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.